This is our third review video on Unit 4. I'll start today with the exercise on our poem, The Second Coming. That's what we ended the second video on. On page 499 in your textbook, the bottom three questions are on the Second Coming. Let's take a look at those. In the widening gyre, what is loosed on the world? He said, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed upon the world. In other words, chaos, war is loosed upon the world. According to the speaker, what do the best lack and what are the worst full of? He said the best, meaning the best people, good people, lack all conviction. In other words, we're very apathetic. We don't care enough to stand up for what is right. But the worst are full of passionate intensity. And so that's what we ended our previous video on, that if the good folks are just sitting back and doing nothing, and the bad folks are actively working, then there goes the world. The blood-dimmed tide is certainly loosed. What vision troubles the speaker's sight? He says a shape with lion body and the head of a man troubles the speaker's sight. So, in other words, the Sphinx. He imagines the Sphinx as being a symbol of something that is dangerous and negative and beastly that is arising in the world, a personification, if you will, of all the evil and the war and the chaos that his own early 20th century time was demonstrating. Now, our textbook does not always keep the works that are given in the time period that they're talking about. So they'll mix in other works. T.S. Eliot is a 20th century poet, for example. James Joyce, who writes our short story Arabi here, 20th century writer. So we have a main text or two or three from the historical period, but then our editors go through the other units and they pick out works that have many of the same themes as our essential question. And remember, our essential question in this one, why are both vision and disillusion necessary? Well, one short story that has to do with maturing, growing up, learning lessons, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. Certainly our short story, Arabi. So in our textbook, and this is what we began in class, the unit on, before fall break. Page 505, we have this delightful short story that is often reproduced. This is from Joyce's bigger collection called Dubliners, Little Stories About Dublin, Ireland, set in the early 20th century. And this is the story about the little boy who has his first crush on a girl. If you have not read the story yet, you need to do that first. You can, on the online edition, play. You see here it takes 16 minutes to play the story, but you can read it to yourself. But read it first and then come back to the video. So if you haven't read the story yet, go ahead and do that first and then come back and watch this video. Okay, so I'm supposing that now you've read the story. And as you took a look at the story, you noticed that the little boy certainly suffered a disappointment. Part of it was his fault, part of it was fault of circumstance, but maybe this is the first time he'd really ever planned on anything and then had the plans mess up and realized that things don't always go according to plan. Joyce really sets us up in this story. If you notice, when we talk about Arabi, it seems very dreary. North Richmond Street was a blind street, dead-end street. Uninhabited house of 2 stories stood at the blind end. People gazed at one another with brown, imperturbable faces. The former tenant of our house was a priest who had died. Then he found a lot of old paper-covered books, but the leaves were yellow because they were old. It's winter time. Always a symbol of impending death and doom in stories and poetry. Dusk fell, the end of day. So they had the end of things, end of life, end of the day, end of the year. And then all of a sudden there's light. There's light that fills the streets. And the light, of course, comes from the one hope of the Irish people, their children. So the children are playing. And then we have Mangans Sister. Now, how ironic that after all these years, as this adult is looking back over this very important thing that happened to him, he simply refers to the girl as Mangans Sister, one of his good friend's sisters. So her name's not even given, which puts it in perspective quite a bit. Things that we think are so important when we're young. Later on, we look back and go, oh, yeah, I remember that. That was kind of neat. It's nice to go through that. but we don't dwell on it. We don't think about it too much. It's not something that occupies our thoughts every day. So it's a gentle recollection that he has, but it's still an important one. He remembered enough of it to learn about disappointment in life. But he still lived his life. Life still went on. Perhaps he did just fine in life. But he still goes back occasionally and thinks about some childhood memories, and this is certainly one of them. Well, Mangans' sister was older. We don't know how old these kids are in the story. Maybe the little boy's about 12 years old. Maybe the girl's 14, 15 years old, an older woman, the first real girl he's ever noticed. But of course, as we read in the story, there's going to be a carnival called Arabi. It's a big flea market and bazaar, and a lot of people from Dublin went to Arabi, and they could buy all kinds of goods that they couldn't find in their regular stores. So the little boy promises the girl, because she can't go, her girls' school is having a retreat that weekend, so he's going to go, and he promises to buy her something. So that's his mission in life now. Not that she asked him to. She probably forgot all about the conversation 5 minutes after it happened. But to him, he has a goal in life now to buy her something. So he reminds his uncle so he can get his allowance. The uncle doesn't even pay any attention to him, goes off to work. The boy comes home from school. It's a Saturday. They had Saturday school for half a day in Ireland. And the uncle didn't come home in time. The uncle is based on Joyce's own father, who, although he loved his family, liked to spend his time in the local tavern more than he liked to spend his time at home. And so this uncle is at the tavern, not thinking about the boy at all. Time passes, it's late at night, and the uncle finally comes back home. Finally gives the little boy a little bit of money. The kid gets on the night train, goes to Arabi, and of course the place is mostly closed by the time he gets there. He looks around, but is very discouraged because he had spent most of his money getting in the adult entrance. The children's cheap entrance was already closed. The lights are going out. People are closing their stalls, and he's left with nothing to buy. Joyce concludes the story in a very interesting way. The little boy, as he's looking around, sees some kids talking. It's a girl who's trying to sell some things, and some English guys flirting with her. Oh, I never said such a thing. Oh, but you did. Oh, but I didn't. Did she say that? Yes, I heard her. Well, there's a fib. Now, how interesting that decades later, as he tells the story, that's what he remembers. Because to him, that's what was going on in his head. The girl, I never said such a thing. In other words, his girl that he liked never asked him to buy her anything. But in his mind, he created that scenario that she wants him to buy her something. No, she didn't. But I heard you say that, didn't I? Nope. And he realized he'd been fibbing to himself the whole time. Observing me, the young lady came over and asked me, did I wish to buy anything? The tone of her voice was not encouraging. She seemed to have spoken to me out of a sense of duty. No, thank you. The young lady changed the position of one of the vases and went back to the two young men. They began to talk of the same subject. I lingered before her stall, though I knew my stay was useless, to make my interest in her wares seem the more real. I knew my stay was useless. I turned away slowly, walked down the middle of the bazaar, allowed the 2 pennies to fall against the 6 pence in my pocket. I heard a voice call from one end of the gallery. The light was out. The upper part of the hall was now completely dark. Gazing up into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven into rut by vanity, and my eyes burned with anguish and anger. Well, for one thing, I guess he was angry at his uncle for keeping him waiting too long, but he's also mad at himself because he kind of set himself up for failure. We sometimes create our own universes, our own ways of interpreting reality that may not actually be that accurate. Maybe this is the little boy's first time to realize that about himself. His vision wasn't a true one. The disillusion brought about an awareness of his situation. Right after that, we have a set of questions. Let's take a look at those. On page 511. When and where does the story take place? It takes place in Dublin. It could be late 19th century or early 20th century. What does the narrator say he does every morning? He says every morning he watches the door of Mangans' house for Mangans' sister to emerge so he can go and follow her as they go to school. Why is the narrator so distracted in school? Well, he's lovesick. All he can think about is Mangans' sister. What does the narrator promise Mangans' sister? He promises her that he will bring her something from the bazaar. Why does the narrator have to wait to go to the bazaar? Well, he has to wait until his uncle gets home and give him the money to go to the bazaar, but the uncle is late getting home that night. So a boy in Dublin, if we look at our summary, number 6 down there, wants a summary. A boy in Dublin pines for his friend's sister, but never really speaks to her much. But one day she speaks to him and asks if he's going to Arabi, stating that she'd like to, but she can't. The narrator promises to bring her something from the fair, but on the evening of the fair, the narrator's uncle returns home late from work. By the time the narrator gets to the fair, it's nearly closed. He's disillusioned with the fair, with the girl, and with himself. And so that ties along with our theme, why are both vision and disillusion necessary? In our next video, we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at our major work from the unit, and that is our selection from Gulliver's Travels.